I'm not who you think I am. Whoa. They call me soda pop can man. Whoa. And I don't feel well with pressure. Such a friendly gesture now. Just keep me out of the freezer. And don't give me a cold shoulder. 'Cause I am just a fragile can. Crush me, crush me, crush me with your hand. So just tap me with your finger and I'll understand. So just tap me with your finger, I won't overflow again. I'm not who you think I am. Whoa. They call me soda pop can man. Whoa. 'Cause I don't feel well with pressure. It's such a friendly gesture now. Just get me out of the freezer. And don't give me the cold shoulder. 'Cause I am just a fragile man. I'm a castle made of sand. Here comes the tide again to wash me out to sea again. I'm not who you think I am. Whoa. They call me soda pop can man. Whoa. 'Cause I don't do well with pressure. Such a friendly gesture now. Just keep me out of the freezer. And don't give me the cold shoulder. 'Cause I am just a fragile can. Whoa. You could crush me, crush me, crush me with your hand. So just tap me with your finger and I'll understand.
Cool Kids for Jesus. So let me link the pin. Let me pin the link. Okay, let's see. Pinned. Okay. So I got Rebecca here. Yes. Yeah. Hey.
Hey, how's everybody?
Good. So I've got like tons of arguments. No, I'm just kidding. I'll show you my. I've told you before, Rebecca, but you know, atheists always ask about like. Or by the way, how are you doing? How's it going?
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. I was just hanging out with some Calvinists, trying to be friendly with Calvinists because I'm so mean to Calvinists all the time. But just
Which
I have
Calvinist were you talking to?
the Rogue Calvinist. His name is Rogue Calvinist. He's gotten kind of popular recently because of his stuff with Leighton Flowers, and then talking to idol killer Warren McGrew. And he plays chess live or whatever, so you can play him. I think that's kind of a fun idea. I'm really bad at chess, but I like it. So yeah. Anyway, so let me just read some. So atheists often ask for evidence for God, right? And I like what you were saying to one of the people on your live stream about animals. We talk about that for a minute too, but I think what you were saying is a one approach that needs to be followed when you're talking to atheists regarding, choosing to believe. I don't know. Let's talk about that after I share this. But people will, I feel like there's like this thing people ask for where it's like, show me evidence for Jesus, but I don't want Christian evidence. I want, from a third party. And it's like asking for a married bachelor. It's like anything historically that references Jesus, something that, is evidence for the validity of the resurrection of Jesus, for instance, is going to be adopted by Christians, and then then they're going to say it's a Christian evidence. It's like, show me proof of a married bachelor, or I won't believe it. It just seems like a silly kind of evidence to ask for. Like, if it supports Jesus, then it's Christian evidence. You know what I'm saying? I get what I'm trying to say. Like,
I definitely get it. Yeah. And I've become kind of grumpy about these types of things because I feel like you have to overlook so much evidence in order to be able to say, like, what's the evidence for God? What's the evidence for Jesus? Like, it like means that there's already something that's gone wrong. But I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, Tyler Vela tells me I don't understand doxastic voluntarism, and maybe I don't. But this question about whether you can voluntarily choose to believe things kind of idea. It's like, I think, what's that gal's name you interviewed her once? She's a philosopher, Christian philosopher. Her name is
yes.
Liz. Yeah, Liz.
Yeah. Cannot remember her last name at this exact moment, but
yeah.
Yes.
She was talking about this, and I think it does go deeper than my kind of cursory understanding, but it's kind of a deep question about, I like what Jonathan Haidt has talked about, where his analogy of like the rider on the elephant. And I think people are kind of naive. It's like, we think of our rational minds, but oftentimes I think there's a sense where we choose our beliefs, and then we find reasons to believe it, to support that afterwards. Or like you can choose to hang out with people that agree with certain things, and that reinforces that belief. And a lot of people have a hard time with this. Like, a lot of atheists say, I saw it in your stream, like Germania was like, oh, I can't help that I don't believe. And I think people struggle with that, and they believe that. I just think it's not that simple, I guess. It's complicated. Like, you can't just make yourself believe untrue things per se, right? But, there is a sense where you can reinforce ideas, and we are products of our environment. But, I mean, I think you just have to be reasonable about all that anyways. What's up, Mike?
Oh, I didn't think you'd say hello so soon. I wasn't prepared to hit the mic button. Greetings, all. Rebecca, how are y'all?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing hunky dory, getting ready for work. I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents. I was born and raised on there is a God, and I have nothing to add. If an atheist says, "Hey, give me proof of God," I'm like, "Hey, look at that tree. It produces oxygen for you, okay, and your breath produces food for it." I don't know. That's the best I've got. I have nothing In fact, quite honestly, I tell atheists, it you shouldn't be able to find proof of God. Where's your faith? Oh, there's proof of God right over there. Let's go to Washington D.C. They got this thing. They got a photograph from 500 B.C. of God. Oh, okay. Well, now I don't need faith. There's proof. So I don't think that there actually is proof. But I just wanted to throw that in there, Jamie, Rebecca. Good to see y'all.
You too. And yeah, I totally agree with you. Actually, what would meet the threshold? Because let's just suppose there was a photograph. How do we know it wasn't photoshopped? How do we know that's actually God? How do we know if there's skywriting that says, I am God? How do we know that's him? Even if he came and appeared in front of us right now, there would still be people who could say, oh, it was a hallucination, or it was a hologram, or it was aliens. Like, I don't see how you can like give something more than what God has already given.
Well, how
Amen.
about a similar thing that Paul had? Of course, that's all in a context of Paul already believing in God. And so, I mean, that event could be, I don't know, I think sometimes Christians think about this sort of stuff weird too. Like when I think about, to me, I used to have this idea that like divine inspiration, like if you were in the room when somebody was writing the Bible, like there would be this bright light and like they'd be in a trance or something. But I think it's just like a guy writing in a room, like it looked just like a normal guy writing down, usually, not every time, but I don't know if that matters at all. But yeah, like what do people expect? Well, let me share this thing that I think is good evidence. That's the best kind of evidence you could ask for. This kind of evidence that is as close as you could get to asking for evidence. And I've presented this before, but like the things that happened around along the 40 years before the temple was destroyed, starting the same. This is just really short thing I'm going to read here, but just here, listen to this. So this to me is evidence that is not Christian evidence that backs up the idea that something happened when Jesus came. So I'll just read this article really quick. So the Talmud relates fascinating information about various miracles that began occurring some 40 years before the destruction of the temple, sometime around the 80, 30, or 31. These miracles are ascribed to zakut or something, or merit, of a certain Shimon Siddiq, who is a highly respected high priest of Israel. However, since these signs began just after the time of Jesus' crucifixion, they further indicate that the parashe of the Holy of Holies, if that's how you say it, has been rent asunder, and now by means of his avodah and zakut, for those who trust in him, the way to the throne of grace has been made accessible to all. Here's the quote from the Talmud. This is Yoma 39b. And they write, our rabbis taught during the last 40 years before the destruction of the temple, the lot for the Lord did not come up in the right hand, nor did the crimson colored strap become white, nor did the westernmost light shine. I guess that's on you can help me out, Mike, maybe, or Rebecca. Is that talking about the lamp, like what do you call it?
No idea at all.
And the doors of the temple, or the doors of Hekel, would become open by themselves. So they record this in the Talmud. It says, according to this passage, the lot for Azazel, contrary to all the laws of probability, came up 40 times in a row in the left hand. This was considered a dire event and signified something had fundamentally changed in the Yom Kippur Ovadah. So, in other words, it was like a bad omen. Like they draw lots for one goat for Yahweh and one for Azazel. And apparently the goat for the Lord comes up in the left hand every single year after Jesus, right, correlating with Jesus' death until the temple was destroyed. The second miracle concerns a crimson strap that was tied to the goat. The custom was to cut a portion of the strap and tie it to the temple door. And after the Azazel goat was killed, I don't think that's accurate, is it? The strap on the temple door turned white to signify the successful atonement of Israel. However, beginning around the 30 or 40 years before the temple was destroyed, the crimson year, let's see, the strap remained crimson each year to the time of the temple's destruction. So apparently, I don't know, there's a verse in the New Testament that talks about this, or I mean the Old Testament, right? They do the Day of Atonement. And so for whatever reason, these people writing the Talmud hundreds of years after the temple was destroyed, it sounds like they're suggesting, that the thing that Christians believe was typing Jesus' sacrifice, it was the way they used to do it in the Old Covenant, the signs that God would give to show that like their sins were atoned for weren't happening anymore. And this is their reporting this. I'll look for that verse in a second. But I think that's rather interesting. Oh, it says, the third miracle was the westernmost light on the menorah in the holy place was found extinguished every time the next morning. This was highly unusual because before this time, the Ma'aravi remained lit through the night and was normally used by the priest to rekindle the other branches of the menorah. After 30 AD, however, this light, the shamash, was no longer found burning, even despite various attempts to ensure that it remained lit through the night. And then the fourth thing, it says these temple doors swung open every night on their own accord. Yohanan ben Zakkai declared that this was a sign of impending doom. That's it from the Talmud Sota 6.3, that foreshadowed the temple itself would be destroyed. So in other words, they had these omens that they record in the Talmud that suggests that. So, and that happens exactly around the time, depending on what your chronology is, of course, but 40 years before the temple was destroyed is when Jesus is crucified. So I guess they're trying to explain why God allowed the temple to be destroyed, because it's just historical fact that they no longer have the temple. But they're not arguing that it correlates with Jesus. It just happens to be the case. I find that highly interesting. What do you guys make of that?
Oh, yeah, Jamie, you've read this to me before, and I wanted to ask you for the source because this is really fascinating. You're the first person that has ever brought that to my attention. It's really, yeah.
Yeah, there's your non-Christian source that correlates with the death of Jesus and things happening. What do you make of that, Mike? Does that make any problems for you at all? I don't think it would, does it? Any thoughts on that you want to talk about? Are you still there? Maybe got raptured. I don't know.
He says he's getting ready for work.
Okay, that's cool.
So
All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, the
Listening.
that just seems really profoundly interesting to me because and by the way, if you look this up, if you look up Yoma 39b on Google, for instance, I had a better source for this, by the way, but that's about as close as you can get to evidence that something significant happened in the first century surrounding the death of Jesus from a non-Christian source, which is clearly not making stuff up to prove Jesus did anything. So, you know, if you don't believe it, you think that's all like hocus pocus or whatever, I guess. But I guess they're trying to just explain that God was showing signs, like with the temple door, which, by the way, I guess were like super huge and heavy. So the idea that they would open by themselves is outrageous. I don't even know what that would look like. Anyways, yeah, I'm trying to look for this other source I had that was better. I just kind of pulled that one out of thin air. I know there's like a book that goes deeper into it, that The Mystery of the Temple, I think it's called. Let's see, no, that's not the one I was thinking of. Anyways, any other thoughts? By the way, the link is pinned if anybody wants to join. I'm curious what kind of arguments you might want to. To me, my favorite arguments are biblical texts. We can look at some. Let me pull that up. Do you have any particular biblical arguments that you think are good, Rebecca, that you would point to show someone that Jesus is like the Messiah or anything particular?
Not really, because I'm not really a fan of those, even though I'm not saying there's not good ones. Like, I know a lot of people make arguments for the resurrection and like things like the prophetic stuff and everything, which I'm all fine with. But to me, like, I don't know. And some people are convinced by that kind of stuff. But for me, it's just kind of like one of those things that I read this story and I believed it. And I just believe that, like, what Jesus says And, you know, the story that the Bible lays out is compelling as a story. And so I just like the story itself and the way it touches people is what convinces me that it's true. And I would say with the help of the Holy Spirit, because I do think the Holy Spirit is like speaking to people as they're reading, if they're reading with an open heart.
Yeah, I
But
agree. I agree with that.
but in this, like you mentioned, evidence for God, which I think is a very different thing than like evidence for, you know, the Bible being true or for Jesus Christ being who he is. Um, I think God has given, even if nobody ever touches a Bible, God has given us awareness of his existence through the things that he made. So that's what I always point people to. And maybe I don't always do the best job of that. I was thinking about that after last night's stream because I was like, maybe I should have talked a little bit more about like what is it in creation that makes me look at it and say it's obvious, you know. But because there are some people who have become so immune to awe, and I'm not sure how that happens to each person. Maybe part of I like I said, I think part of it can be because of sin, but there might be other reasons. So at least it might be worth laying it out. So maybe I'll do that, but I'll let you make your point that you want to make about this.
Yeah, I posted this. I don't know if anybody saw this, but this is one of my favorite little short arguments. So I'll play this again, and I'm hoping people will join that have their own arguments that they have. But let me see. I always thought this. In fact, this has to be a good argument because Rob Rowe from Sentinel Apologetics included it in his commentary, so it must be a good argument, right? Let's see. So I'll just show this quick presentation of this. I just think it's really cool. Some stuff you can't make up. So we could talk about that too. I think like you're talking about, the story is so compelling. There's attributes of these stories. Yeah. Matt, if you want to come in, I'd love to hear scientific arguments. And you're right. When I say I was loose in my thing, evidence for God. Yeah, I think there's evidence for God that's scientific, philosophical, and that's different than arguments for Jesus. But I'm open to both kinds of arguments, and I don't think they're the same thing per se. So the validity of the Christian faith isn't simply there's more philosophical general arguments for deism or theism in general. So I just wasn't being specific. That's all.
I got to giggle every time I hear the name Rob Rowe. It sounds like Scooby-Doo. Rob Rowe.
Oh,
sorry.
Like those jokes about like, what do you call a man with no arms and legs on the front porch? Matt. What do you call a man with no arms and legs in a lake? Bob. And I was like, I made up one about Rob Rowe. It was like a man with no arms and legs next to an overturned boat. I forget what it was, but something about a rowboat and him bobbing in the water. But anyway, okay, let's see. Womp, 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 womp. Okay, here we go. I think this is it. Oh, let me get the commercial off first. Okie dokie. This one's one of my favorites here.
New Jerusalem, it said, is made up of 12 precious stones that we would make into jewelry now. Now, here's the fascinating thing, which to me is the final proof that that book is the Word of God, that it must be God-inspired. In the last generation only, we've discovered how to make purer light than we had before. Most light is bouncing around, waves crashing into each other, going in all directions, so that the light coming from that spotlight still lights this side of my face by reflecting off that tinsel up there. We're used to light coming at us from all directions. But we've now discovered how to send light in one direction. Laser light is the most common. You've seen laser light beams straight as a die. But we've also got what we call cross-polarized light. A polarized filter, if you can imagine, allows lights through like that. But if you put another polarized filter at right angles to that, you've really got a very fine filter. If you take sunglasses and take one lens and put it at right angles to the other, it goes even darker. It only lets very straight light through. Now, people have taken jewels and precious stones and cut a very thin slice for microscopic purposes, and then shone cross-polarized light through them to see what happens. To put it very crudely, what happens to these precious stones in pure light? And one of two entirely different things happens with every jewel. The technical term, to give you a bit of science for a moment, is anisotropic jewels and isotropic jewels. Now what happens is this. Some jewels in pure light, whatever their color to begin with, they may be red, blue, or green, turn into all the colors of the rainbow and the most fantastic patterns. Other precious stones in pure light lose all their color, just go black, look like a lump of coal dust. And it's only in this generation that people have discovered this unusual property. For example, diamonds in pure light are nothing.
Did you get that, ladies?
They're not
Did you
even
hear that. Diamonds, nothing.
Nothing.
They won't be there.
No, so make the most of them here. Rubies, garnets, just lose everything.
Emeralds.
No, they keep it.
Oh, good.
There are other stones that are anisotropic and go into these beautiful colors. Now, here's the fascinating thing. The 12 precious stones that God uses to build the New Jerusalem are all anisotropic. In pure light, they are all far more beautiful. And God doesn't touch the diamonds or the rubies. He doesn't build with them. Now, let's just put on the screen a picture of these stones.
Yeah.
Look at the top 12 stones on this picture, and you'll see the stones of the New Jerusalem. Look at the 4 bottom ones at the bottom of the picture, and you'll see they're black, no attraction, whatever. Now then, who knew this 2,000 years ago? No scientist knew it. Nobody knew it. John the Apostle, writing down the book of Revelation as the Lord dictated it to him, he didn't know. Nobody knew except one person in the entire universe, and he knew, and that was God himself.
Where is that written exactly?
Revelation 21,
Right.
halfway through, and you'll find all the 12 stones listed there. And you can just imagine from the picture we've seen on the screen how beautiful the New Jerusalem is going to be. No need for do-it-yourself decoration or changing rooms there. No need. The materials that God uses will be fabulous.
I find that compelling because of the way Scripture talks about light and Christ being the light, and that kind of, you want to take it metaphorically or however you want to take it, but the idea that the light of Christ in John 1, for instance, and what it says in the book of Revelation, there's no more night because the Lamb is their light. And, he who loves his brother doesn't walk in the darkness. And let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. Don't hide your light, which is Christ, under a bushel, like set it up on a hill, right? So like that analogy and idea, and that the theological concept of the source of, light and what Christ does, he doesn't, every eye will see him, that sort of thing. I don't know. It just seems like the metaphor. So, and then to find out that all the things you could use if you're just making something up, but then it turns out that all of these gemstones have a particular property, which when pure light is shown into them, they radiate all the colors of the rainbow. It just seems awfully coincidental. It just seems like a really good evidence to me. I don't know. Hey, Matt. What's up, man?
Yeah, I can spin off of that one because I have 2 things that are very personal to me like that. One of them has to do with light, so I'll start with that one. So I'm educated as an aerospace engineer and an astrophysicist. And in astrophysics, we deal with obviously universal scales. And if you're not aware, the universe is massive, right? It takes 14 billion light years for light to travel. And so there's a known problem in physics. Why is light slow? It doesn't make sense why light is so slow. And I've always known this problem in physics. I don't really care, right? But I took the position like, well, if I assume it was intentionally made at that speed, what scale is light? What scale is light at? And I was just looking. It was actually on a Sabbath. I was thinking about this when the sun was going down, and sure enough, this is absolutely crazy, because if you're not aware, Earth is tiny and really just a speck, and it's useless, right? When you think about the scale of the universe, it's nothing. So you would think the speed of light would be faster regarding the scale of the universe, how big things really are. And so when you take the speed of light, it oh man, when you take the speed of light, it is fast enough to travel around Earth 7 times in 1 second. I'm like, well, that's mighty convenient. So then I decided to calculate the geostationary orbit of a satellite. So one thing, in astrophysics that we calculate is orbital mechanics. So where would a satellite sit above the atmosphere? So it would always be in the same place at a certain speed. And when you do that calculation, it turns out if you send a light signal from Earth up to a geostationary orbit satellite, and then it goes around the world, like to other geostation, and then comes back down, it happens to take 1 second. So if you use the speed of light to send a signal up to a geostationary orbit satellite, and these are communication satellites, so this is for communication. This is a particular spot orbiting the Earth, and it goes around the Earth in 1 second. And I'm just like, man, that's really coincidental. Then when you look at if light was, so I went the other way. What if light was slower? Well, if light was slower, we could not operate doing exactly what we're doing right now. You see, the speed of light is fast enough that everyone here can have a communication, have a conversation instantaneously on Earth without really noticing any difference. But it's not too slow. If it was just a little slower, we couldn't do this. It would be irritating. There would be a reasonable experience where it feels real. In fact, our electronics wouldn't work right either. The speed of light is extremely
We'd all be
important.
buffering. Every conversation, we'd be buffering.
Yeah, correct. It wouldn't work. So to me, knowing the scale of the universe and knowing how everything functions based on that constant, like why did God make it a constant? It seems particularly coincidental to allow information to travel around the world, and specifically the world. Like not Jupiter, not Mars, not Saturn, not even it's not even scaled to our solar system. Lord, it's not even scaled to the solar system. Like it takes 8 minutes to the sun. it's just that to me really hits home, because it is light and it's about traveling in information traveling, so people can all instantaneously have some sort of interaction. So similar to that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
no. I'm about to transition to the second one, and that
Oh, I
was my
was just gonna
paper. I
say,
did.
oh yeah, cool. I think the time we live, like when you talk about just like the fact that eclipses can happen seems really amazing to me. That the Earth and the sun and the moon can, that the sun is 400 times bigger than the moon, and then the moon is 400 times closer, and so like it makes for a perfect eclipse. It just seems really incredible, and the moon is like shockingly big compared to other moons. Like they really, the the explanation of the how the moon orbits the Earth is really unexplainable in a lot of ways, but I won't get into that. I just think it's pretty
Yeah,
incredible.
this is what I tell atheists, that if the moon always faces Earth, because of the moon's rotation, it always faces the Earth. How come the front of it looks like it's been splattered away? It's as if the Earth exploded at Noah's flood and wiped out the face of the moon and created the Kuiper belt. Carry on, brothers. I'm gonna head off to work. Good luck, Jamie.
Thanks, buddy. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
See ya.
Thanks.
What do you think, Becca? Does that impress you at all? The whole eclipse thing at all, or do you think it's silly?
No, it's great. I mean, it's amazing. And I think there's lots of things like that we could point to. I mean, the people are always talking about the fine-tuning argument, and I'm not sure about all of the arguments that are made for the fine-tuning, because I do think there's some kind of messed up stuff in cosmology that maybe we're appealing to that's not right. But that's interesting, Matt, that you have been trained in astrophysics, because I would love to talk to you about that sometime, because I'm kind of interested in all the stuff that's going on with the Big Bang right now.
Yeah, there's that's a whole nother thing. Where's that energy going? That's actually a big unknown. One of the
Rebecca's
laws of it.
She's in a lot of cool videos with a guy on some stuff. But why don't you tell us your other one, Matt?
Yeah, well, just to kind of touch on the moon thing, coincidentally, it takes a second for the light to get to the moon. So it doesn't take a second to go there and then back. See, that delay is too long. So just getting light to the moon and back, it'll take 2 seconds. So like again, that emphasizes that the light is scaled to Earth, not even to Earth to the moon. It starts to stretch just to get to the moon, which is in coincidental orbit, where it's 400 times smaller than the sun, right? It's just perfect enough to make the eclipse. But talking about scale, so the paper I did in college, we were doing the probability of life in the universe, and naturally you go to the Drake equation for that, the Dirac equation for that, and it's just a standard probability equation. But I approached my professor, and he was Jewish. Half of the professors seemed to be Jewish, and so I knew it was kind of safe to talk to him about this. And I said, what's your thoughts about me? Instead of just saying life, what's your thoughts about me developing the probability of a single life that's ultimately complex? So obviously, like, there's the argument that God is a simple God, right? That whole, I don't know if you guys know about that, but I'm making the argument of complexity of structure. So and the intellectual structure is complex, right? All knowing, for example. And so he asked me, well, what's my scientific basis for this argument? Well, there's two things. One is in aerospace engineering, we do something called subscale modeling. So you can take a full scale model, say of an engine, and then we can subscale that engine so that only key points of that subscale model give the same performance as the full scale model. So it doesn't actually work like a real engine. It's not like a small functioning engine, but the way the subscale is designed, it will actually predict the full scale version. And so this is true. We can make subscale to full scale and then do real life testing and then simulation testing. to compare performance models. So this is an extrapolation of predictive, predicting future events. So that's number one. Number two, I explained to him that we already have something in astrophysics where we predict the complexity of like atoms. So if you have a hydrogen atom, it's not as simple as the hydrogen atoms that we see everywhere. Like, yes, we see hydrogen, right? But you can actually get more hydrogen with more and more neutrons that will make the hydrogen more complex. So you get these really dense hydrogen atoms with as many neutrons as possible. And so it's a really strange phenomenon, but essentially these kind of heavy hydrogen atoms exist, but the more complicated those hydrogen atoms are, the less likelihood they will exist. So it narrows down to eventually only a few. And so I said to him, we see the same thing on Earth. When you look at Earth, there's only one highly intelligent species, human. And then, but there's tons of dog-like level intelligence, right? There's tons of and then there's billions of insect types of intelligence, right? So there seems to be the similar triangle, and that's a mathematical proof as well. So I explained an engineering proof. I explained a scientific proof, right? And then similar triangles is a mathematic proof. And so he's like, yeah, sure. So what mathematic proof would you use besides similar triangles? I said Bayesian statistics, because Bayesian statistics shows if the event, and by the way, a Calvinist made that, and the Calvinists made it based on the idea that the universe is predictable because of God, and that's where the scientific method comes from as well. It actually comes from testing the fact that God made things that were unchangeable and therefore testable, and it's us that's wrong, not the universe. But anyways, so I said Bayesian statistics, which all of our electronics and all of our technology today depends on Bayesian statistics. And the reason is because if it exists once, if you can find it once, then the likelihood of it occurring again increases. So if you see more of it, then the likelihood of it happening again increases. So I'm making the argument, if we have one similar triangle, one smaller scale triangle of a intelligence hierarchy, and then you expand it across a 14 billion light year universe, then the same will apply. The intelligence structure will apply. Well, when you do the Bayesian math, it turns out to be like 0.98%, meaning it's almost inevitable that there will be one intelligent structure that is ultimately complex more than anything else in the universe. So I basically proved the existence of God, but that's in the universe itself, whereas God itself is not in the universe. So that I would argue that 0.8%, 0.98% becomes 1.0. It becomes 100% certainty because it's outside. But that's it. So that was my thesis paper in astrophysics 10 years ago or so.
Man, that's awesome. Any
Thanks.
thoughts, Rebecca? Yeah, that's awesome. I'd like to see it. I
Yeah,
have
thanks
another.
for sharing. I haven't heard that. Mm-hmm.
So that I'll talk to you about it later because I'm not prepared to talk about it. But I heard there's this really interesting theory. I heard that you reminded me of that. I heard a guy talking about recently. It was a new idea, so not the same thing. But let me share this. I found this really interesting. Let's see, let me see if I can pull this up. I'll just put the paper on the screen. This is just like a Sabbath school lesson that I thought was really good from like 10 years ago. Just butt in, you guys, if you want to comment. Let me zoom in on it a little bit. Feel free to just kind of interrupt me. So many, even among those who call themselves Adventists, question the true origin of the Sabbath and of the 7-day weekly cycle. Of course, the Bible claims that God instituted both during the creation week described in Genesis, the Sabbath and the 7-day week. However, critics of the biblical account claim that the 7-day week was actually invented by the Assyrians or by Sargon I, king of Akkad, around 2350 BC, passed on to the Babylonians, who then passed it on to the Jews during their captivity in Babylon around 600 BC. The ancient Romans used an 8-day week, but after the adoption of the Julian calendar in the time of Augustus, the 7-day week came into use in the Roman world. For a while, both the 7 and 8-day weeks coexisted in the Roman world, but by the time of Constantine decided to Christianize the Roman world around AD 321, the 8-day weekly cycle had fallen out of use in favor of the more popular 7-day week. Secular historians and biblical critics often suggest that the 7-day week likely arose originally is a rough division of the lunar monthly cycle. However, the 7-day week is actually only 23.7% of a lunation, which means that a continuous cycle of 7-day weeks rapidly loses synchronization with the monthly lunar cycle. This is a really common, it's basically a quarter of a lunation, and the months are based off the moon cycle. And so they were just trying to cut up the moon cycle into a quarter. Well, this is problematic for various reasons. A lot of people doubt this, even secular people. This problem is compounded by the fact that a lunation is only the mean time for the lunar phase cycle, which each individual lunar phase is varying in length. They cited the moon to through its cycle to do the months on the Jewish calendar historically. And so while the year was adjusted by adding an extra month every so often and changing the length of months to be 29 or 30 days, if you actually look at it carefully historically, what the Jewish calendar did, that's what kept it in sync with what you could call a true solar year, or a cycle of the seasons, or a true trip around the sun, which would be a true year, right? Like, which is what our calendar is basically lined up with. But theirs was not 360 days every year. It was, that's a lunar calendar, but so it's a lunisolar calendar. In other words, every month to month was based on the sighting of the moon and the lunation cycle. Anyways, I digress. Also, the duodecimal, base 12, and sexagesimal numerical systems have historically been the primary system used to divide other chronological and calendar units. Of course, that would be the lunar calendar based on a 360-degree circle. Therefore, it is not immediately apparent why the 7-day week was selected by ancient cultures rather than a week that included a number of days that was a factor of these numeral systems, right? It's not part of the sexagesimal system, such as a 6-day week or a 12-day week, or a week that divided the lunation more accurately using a factor of these number systems, such as a 5-day or 10-day week. Finally, there are no historical Jewish or Babylonian records that confirm that these cultures explicitly defined the 7-day week as a quarter of a lunation. It seems then like the 7-day weekly cycle is a most unusual or arbitrary division of time that is unrelated compared to other more obvious divisions of time, like a month or a year or a day, obviously. And then the day being, cut up into actual accurate factors of the length of a day. So which division of the history of the 7-day week is most likely correct? That of secular historians and biblical critics, or that of the Bible itself? Why has a 7-day week been observed for so long by so many cultures? Why is this particularly weekly cycle so popular compared to the other more natural or rational options like the 10-day week that was attempted in France during the bloody French Revolution or the Enlightenment period? There's a nice picture there, if you can see it, of somebody's head being cut off and shown to the crowds. Well, for one thing, the idea that the Jews adopted the 7-day week from the Babylonians during their captivity some 600 years BC is at least partially based on the still popular but effectively falsified documentary hypothesis of biblical critics. Numerous claims of those who framed the documentary hypothesis and of the biblical critics in general have been definitively falsified. For example, biblical critics once argued that writing itself had not been invented by the time of Moses. Of course, numerous 20th century discoveries have falsified this notion, such as the discovery of the ancient Ebla tablets. The Ebla tablets, written some 2200 years BC, proved that writing, even alphabetic typewriting, was in existence well before Moses. Some of the statements about creation found on these tablets also seem to have parallels to the biblical creation narrative, suggesting that The Genesis creation story, or something very similar to it, was known well before the Deuteronomists, or even Moses came on the scene. In fact, the farther one goes back in time with archaeological discoveries, the closer the creation stories seem to get to the one found in the Bible. These tablets also speak of a flood story like that of the flood story in the Bible. The Ebla tablets also mention the names Abraham and Isaac, suggesting that such names were known and common during this time. They also tell of two sinful cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, and mention all 5 of the cities of the valley in the same order mentioned in the Bible. This is in the face of the higher critics who have claimed that Sodom, Gomorrah, and other Canaan cities of the Bible never did exist. However, the Ebla tablets showed the Bible was correct and the critics were wrong, yet again. And the list goes on and on. Of course, the Ebla tablets do not mention the 7-day creation week, or any other particular weekly cycle for that matter. So maybe critics are right for once when it comes to at least the origin of the 7-day week. Consider that if the biblical version is in fact the true story of history, that God may have actually provided extra biblical evidence within life itself of the true origin of the week. Wouldn't it be most surprising from the naturalistic perspective to find 7-day rhythms within living things? Yet this is exactly what has been discovered. Many living things, to include human beings, experience 7-day or circumseptan biological cycles. Just means 7, circular 7. The relativity new science of chronobiology has uncovered some totally unexpected facts about living things. This is almost over. To include the most puzzling circumseptan or 7-day cycles experienced by many living things, secular scientists find it difficult to explain how such a 7-day cyclical pattern would arise or evolve in living things by any natural means. This is from I think a secular paper, this quote. At first glance, it might seem that weekly rhythms developed in response to the 7-day week imposed by human culture thousands of years ago. However, this theory doesn't hold once you realize that plants, insects, and animals other than humans also have weekly cycles. Biology, therefore, not culture, is probably at the source of our 7-day week. So basically, we evolved from animals, which naturally, for some odd, strange reason, had a 7-day week. So they're trying to decide whether somehow we impose this on creation, or creation, it came up through evolution, because under their paradigm. Campbell summarizes the findings of the world's foremost authority on rhythms and the pioneer of the science of chronobiology. Franz Hallberg proposes that body rhythms of about 7 days, far from being passively driven by the social cycle of the weekly calendar, are innate, autonomous, and perhaps the reason why the calendar week arose in the first place. These circumseptan or about weekly cycles, about weekly rhythms, are one of the major surprises turned up by modern chronobiology. 15 years ago, few scientists would have expected that 7-day biological cycles would prove to be so widespread and so long established in the living world. They are of very ancient origin, appearing in primitive one-celled organisms, and are thought to be present even in bacteria, the simplest form of life now existing. Specific examples of circumseptan rhythms in humans include reject of organ transplants, immune response to infections, blood and urine chemicals, blood pressure, heartbeat, the common cold, coping hormones, and even one's mood or general state of mind. There's also evidence of circumseptan cycles in the formation of tooth enamel. There are also examples in other living things, such as algae, Acetobularia mediterranea, known as the mermaid's wineglass, that shows a 7-day growth cycle, or Brazilian bees that observe a 7th-day Sabbath rest cycle. If the 7-day week is an invention of culture and religion, as most historians would have us believe, how do we explain these innate circumseptan rhythms in primitive algae, rats, plants, bees, and face flies? These forms of life have no calendar and can't read the Torah. There is even evidence that being in or out of sync with the cycle may have an effect on longevity. Consider, for example, that the lifespans of the face fly, Musca autumnalis, or the springtail Fulsomia candida, are markedly longer than oviposition shifts are allowed to be carried out at intervals that are 7 days apart. There is, however, research suggesting a lunar influence on various cycles, but several other experiments have shown an intrinsic or endogenous quality to circumseptan cycles that is apparently independent of any external influences, to include that of the lunar cycles. does seem, however, that these endogenously derived rhythms are able to respond to external influences, such as circadian influences of day and night or the lunar induced tides. What is especially interesting is that the circaseptan rhythm, among all other circadian rhythms, appears to be the one rhythm by which all others are tuned or orchestrated. I'll stop here, or I can keep going, but I don't know.
Well, I
What do you
wanted
guys?
to jump in and just ask, because sometimes there's like a lot of stuff that's being crammed in here. What is he talking about with organ transplants and blood pressure and all? What does he mean by that? What is there? How is there an impact on that?
Yeah, he doesn't say, but he's just I think just listing things where this cycle has been. I wish I could try to look in it deeper. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, he said immune response. I think that's the hint. If it's an organ transplant rejection, it probably takes 7 days. I think fertilization cycles are 7 days, right? It's 6 to 7. In the middle is the most fertile day. I believe so as well. For females, you would have to tell me though, Rebecca.
Well,
Yeah,
I
it seems like
don't know about that actually, but it seems like it's a bit of a stretch because, like, let's say, okay, there's something that didn't seem to, follow a 7-day cycle. Then would we say that that is evidence against the 7-day cycle? I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical about this.
okay. Let me read some more of what it says here.
Not about all. I liked the stuff, the historical stuff, but I'm just saying, like, these other connections to various things in nature, because I'm look, I have not looked into this, but I'm pretty certain that we could find animals that are not following this pattern and things like that. There's all kinds of stuff going on in nature, so I don't know. Do you guys agree, or what do you think?
I think the well, this is the second law of thermodynamics, actually, right? So in the second law of thermodynamics, it means everything will degrade unless there's an outside source. So if you take that assumption, God being the outside source who sustains the universe, but he's letting things degrade, I would assume we should, exactly to your point, we should see a whole bunch of things fall out of cycle. Like the moon monthly cycle should be 28 days, but that's been getting slower and slower and slower. And so we see this, the whole universe is kind of draining itself down to some point to where, scientists believe it'll just expand to nothingness, right? So I actually think it's a symptom of a dying universe, and if you took it theologically, it was because we were kicked out of the universe, right? We were kicked out of heaven, if you will, and we are only sustained by God's grace, is how I would interpret that.
Yeah, I think they're more like I think like that first quote from this paper, I would say apparently so this person isn't writing regarding trying to like make this argument. This is just things that they're finding that doesn't make sense to them. They're like, they're seeing that this isn't a pressure put on it from outside, and so like what's causing this, like from a evolutionary point of view. So let me read this again. Or let me just continue where I was going, because I think this explains a little bit more that might suggest some of the issues here that you're pulling up, right? Because obviously, right, everything isn't on a 7-day cycle, right? Okay. So here he says this: the endogenous nature of the about weekly rhythms is shown by their occurrence in animals kept under laboratory conditions, precluding circaseptan periodic unit, circaseptan. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Periodic input. Their appearance as circaseptan reaction patterns after noxious stimuli or introduction of an antigen, and in human subjects by the observation of their free running rhythms that are not synchronized to environmental time cues. In other words, it's like an innate thing built into their the way they operate. So with a frequency different from the calendar week, it appears that our 7-day week, which is found in many ancient and modern civilizations, including the 3 main monotheistic religions, may be an adaptation to an endogenous biological rhythm rather than the rhythm being a societally impressed phenomenon. So in other words, apparently these people are seeing this in such a way, it sounds like to me anyways, and I don't understand it totally, but these people are not arguing for the validity of a young earth or something, but they're saying this stuff is so innate in biology. They're actually proposing that rather than seeing these things as a imposed thing from the outside on the animal kingdom, but they think it actually, these things are in the biological biome, and there's something innate about them that caused us to somehow make up a 7-day week from the development from the biology within the animal kingdom. So why are they saying that? I don't totally get it, but they're
There's
saying
a point
it's
to that, though,
yeah.
if you don't mind. There's
Yeah,
actually a
please.
point to that, because obviously, if I actually came to become Christian over the argument of evolution when I was 14. And there's actually a point to this, because strangely, like let's assume evolution is true. Okay, then why did we evolve to be the only species that can recognize power constructs that are immaterial? In other words, we're the only species where religiosity exists and has been proven to be genetic. Religiosity doesn't mean a religion, but the concept of like being ideologically driven. And so we can make gods, this immaterial power construct out of anything. And this is kind of what drives our society. So what is it about evolution that allowed us to become religious? it's a really strange phenomenon that we don't see in any other species. It's uniquely human.
Right. Well, I'll wrap this up here, Rebecca. I'm glad you're being critical of this. I put the link in the chat.
I'm
So
not
you can
trying to
pull
be too hard on it, Jamie. I mean,
No,
it
you're
might
not.
be right. I'm just like a little bit skeptical about
Sure. No,
the
that's
claims
good.
being made. Yeah.
So you can look at this and then we can talk about it again too. I'll just wrap it up here because they're trying to put it together here. This is some dude wrote this, so I don't. Again, given the historical reliability of higher biblical critics compared to the fact that the Bible's claims about history have proven true time and again, combined with the internal evidence for these rhythms within ourselves and many, if not all, living things, is it really such a stretch to imagine the Bible might be right? Yet regarding the creation week and the Sabbath rest given to us by God from the very beginning of life on the planet. Consider a situation. They're totally simping for Adventists, just so you know. So consider a situation where someone, say the God of the Bible in this case, claimed to have created a given cyclical pattern of time specifically for our benefit, i.e., the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. This is a testable claim. Given the truth of such a claim, the implication is very direct and clear. Obviously, in such a situation, one should actually expect to find some sort of biorhythms that is tuned to this particularly weekly pattern. One should also expect that if one did not follow God's advice on following this pattern, given that God actually exists and is in fact our maker, that one would be able to notice a physical difference in one's general well-being when in or out of line with God's claimed ideal pattern for the weekly cycle. In other words, God has presented a testable hypothesis or claim to us that we can actually test in a scientific, potentially falsifiable manner. Perhaps there is a reason why Seventh-day Adventists are the longest-lived ethnically diverse group of people in the world. It's like being told to use a particular fuel for your car for optimal performance by the car's designer. You can expect some sort of actual physical difference if you don't use the particular type of fuel you were told to use by the car's creator. Anyways, okay. They do live longer. I don't expect I will, but because of my past choices, but I'm okay with that.
I did want kind of, somebody in the comments said something about worshiping the sun. And we actually had somebody at church kind of do this weird thing as well, like, hey, the sun was in the middle of the week, let's not ignore the sun, which I don't know what he was getting at, kind of Masonic imagery there. But strangely enough, if you look at the creation story, I think this is powerful stuff. Like it never hit me until, I was looking at what this guy was saying, but life was life was created on the third day, and the sun was created on the fourth day. So that means God gives us life, and the sun is there, of course, to give us what means of times and festivals. That's what it says. It's actually for us, our benefit to understand time as it's passing by, and that's on the fourth day. So time, for our perspective, is instituted on the fourth day, but life was created on the third day without the sun. I just think that's great because it's like sticks it right to the sun worshippers.
Right.
Well,
Exactly.
and in addition to that, I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, well, you think there was light before the sun was there, and the sun didn't come till the fourth day?"
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe it wasn't such a bad idea to create like an atmosphere before you put a burning hot gas like that could
Mm,
scorch us all instantly if we didn't have an atmosphere.
that's a good point.
So, anyway.
That's a great point because that's a fantastic point. Microorganisms and such, they release all the gases from all the chemical reactions. So wow, that's a good point because when we are terraforming proposals are to put like algae or whatever, right? Like say on the surface of Mars, and then over hundreds of years, it will create an atmosphere. Good thinking. Wow, I agree.
Rebecca, why don't you tell us about some of the stuff you were talking about with Sal? Because I tried to make a video saying, I bet you in the James Webb Telescope, they're going to find stars that are too far and too old. Oh, cool. Pastor Kevin Morgan, who's been on the ADL once, is in the backstage. So let me let him on. Hey, good to see you. Thanks for joining. Did you have some comments about the circumception thingy?
Yeah, well, just a kind of an overview on that. You're hearing me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, good. Just want to double check because I hadn't had the mics on today. I did a little bit of research on it, a preliminary for a book that someone was working on, and though there are not any specific ironclad circumception patterns, they seem to be quite prevalent within not only the species, but even in other animals and things, that there's a kind of an optimal healing cycle on a 7-day cycle. There are blood sugars, liver functions, a number of things that track with a 7-day cycle, so that it seems that human beings are set up for that, and there's no real clear reason for it that you can attach it to, say, um, the phases of the moon, or like tides are tied to the moon, or the sun, or the yearly cycle, or anything like that. It's just unique that it's on this 7-day cycle that we function, so that we have kind of an ebb and flow in the way that we operate. So that was just my comment, and that's so there. It does seem like it really does work well for us, particularly on this planet. We have no way of knowing if it would work if we were, say, on Mars or something else, but it does work on this planet.
Yeah, and in some of those quotes, which were really brief, obviously it seems that they're kind of befuddled about this, and some of them want to actually suggest that it's somehow, since they're seeing it so prevalent in the animal kingdom, that it would have like come up and then somehow manifested, by us making some sort of religious idea out of it or something. But that doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it is kind of it's just intriguing.
Yeah. Ultimately, I couldn't create a whole book out of it, but it just really did pique my interest.
So,
Awesome.
what do you have any particular? If someone asked you, why do you think God exists? What would you tell them?
My thinking is reason from cause to effect, and that is the best explanation for integrated, exquisite complexity within the natural world is that there's a mind behind it. That is the absolute strongest issue for me, and I can't get away from it. And when I've had discussions with people who have the opposite view, that everything came by some kind of a chance, then they say, where is there evidence of God? I'm like overwhelmed, because everywhere I look is this exquisite integrated design, and that for every single function, we tend to look at things in a kind of a macro level, so that we just kind of gloss over it. It just seems so easy. But it's kind of like me when I used to watch people do these little dances when I was a kid. I'd just kind of yawn and say, "Oh, that's amazing," and then I tried to do it once, and then I realized, hey, there's a lot that goes into that. And when I look into the natural world, yeah, it's there. It just exists, but it's pretty exquisite. And the deeper you go, the more you see that everything has little balances. And so if somebody has a deficiency disease or something, you don't just give them what they're deficient in and fix the problem, because everything else is connected to everything else. And so, you give them thyroid, well, then their thyroid quits working more, and so everything is in balance. Everything is integrated exquisitely. And if you want to give function, some tiny little function, it requires creating new processes within the genetics to actually produce that for the next generation. And does that just happen? And so I've discussed this with a person who's very near to me, and I said, well, if you want me to believe that it came by chance, then you've got to show me that works today. You've got to demonstrate that. How can I believe that evolution did occur if I don't see that it does occur? And the best examples that anybody's been able to give is something that's broken has a slight advantage over something that's not broken. And that doesn't get you there.
Yeah, you can't break somebody's
design.
legs.
Design.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I remember when I was working on a fuel injected car when I was a new mechanic, and it was running, I was analyzing the exhaust, and it was running rich. And then, counterintuitively, it was because like one of the fuel injectors was out, so the others were overcompensating, in other words. So you can't, it doesn't always look like what you might first think it is, sort of thing. It's kind of because everything's integrated. It's integrated. Overcompensation, compensation, which kind of throws you for a loop. I did want to mention that Rebecca isn't an Adventist, but she's a young earth creationist, and she has 2 channels, her other channel. Rebecca, do you want to tell us about it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have Bread of Life, and then I have Examining Origins, and on that I'm really kind of discussing evolution, the Big Bang, and other scientific topics. But I'm not preachy on that channel. It's really just about the science. So, but I don't put that much energy into it. Eventually I want to get more into that, but it is very time consuming as a layperson to be able to put together videos and stuff like that on these topics.
Yeah, but it's curious. It gets your interest up, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've always been passionate about this, and it's exactly what you're saying, Pastor Kevin. A good analogy for this, I think, or a good example of why these design arguments should be so obvious is, and this is one that Sal presented to, somebody who did believe in evolution and it wasn't a believer in God. But he said, okay, if if we brought you in a room and we said, okay, we've got this jar of 500 quarters. Can you go out of the room for a minute? And then you bring them back in, and you've poured, all the quarters from the jar are on the desk, and they're all flipped to heads. Now, did these get here? Would anybody who comes back in that room say that those got there by chance? And
I can think of some people who would.
I know, and,
Yeah, just
and
give it more
that's the
time.
problem. They
Just give
don't
it more
wanna
time.
They don't want to answer that question. But every cell in our body is like made up of a billion at least non-living organized parts,
Amen.
right? And that's just one cell. In the tip of my finger, there are more complicated and more numerous machines than all the machines that humanity has ever built. And so then on top of that, you've got those complex proteins at work in all of your cells. And then on top of that, those work together in harmony in the larger system, where you've got nerves, skeleton, muscles, all of these things. And by the way, they happen to be connected to your brain so that you can wiggle your finger. And oh, by the way, if you have eyes and you just saw your finger wiggle, that's another thing that, like, the complexity and the
Yes.
way that our systems all work in complete harmony.
Yeah.
This is not something that happens by chance. It does not happen by natural selection. And so there is no explanation for that. And that's why I'm passionate about the topic of evolution, because I think so many people have been incredibly deceived. They have been stripped of their awe of the creator because they've been told from a very young age that all of these things can just spontaneously come about. And I'm sorry, they were duped. They believed it, and they're still duped. And I really hate seeing grown, educated people who have so bought into that ridiculous story. And so that's what I'm passionate about sharing. But a lot of Christians apologists don't even like design arguments because they themselves have been duped about the evolution stuff. And even if okay, I'll even grant I don't believe in evolution, but let's even just grant that God used evolution. It still needs so many miracles. So go ahead and believe in it, but you've got to have miracles all along the way. So anyway, I think design arguments are very strong, and I believe that's the revelation that God has given to all people of who he is. So it doesn't even matter if you've never read a bit of the Bible. You can look at the things you've made. You can look at your own thumb, watch it wiggle, and know that there is a God.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's hard for me to even call it an argument, because it's just the observation of the most basic fundamental thing, that when we see something that is integrated and complex both, it just does not stand to reason. It's not even the natural thought to say that. But like you say, people have been trained to do it. I think it boils down to, and this is my modified definition of an atheist, and this was after multiple discussions with one atheist who's near to me, and that is that atheism is not the belief that there is no God, but atheism is the belief that I don't need a God. And that's really, in my day-to-day living, I don't need a God, and I'm very happy to accommodate a philosophy of science that doesn't require a God, and yet it requires something even more fantastic than a God, and that is, that everything came from nothing, and that design came from chaos. It's even a bigger belief. And I had that discussion with a fellow one time. We were on a jury together and we were talking about it. He was describing how he believed. And I knew he was a respectful atheist. And as we talked, we had a good conversation. But I said, I'm afraid I don't have that much faith. And he just laughed. He said, look at me. I'm the one who's got the bigger faith here.
It's that's an interesting point you make, because I think what gets overlooked is the intangible equations that govern the universe. We call it the laws of physics, and they cannot be changed. Well, something had to make it. So if something had to change, or did it exist before? If laws of physics cannot be changed, then they were always there. What made the laws of physics as things exploded and came to be? Like that intangible law that seems to govern everything, to me is indisputable proof of God.
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca reminded me of something really quick. I just want to play it because I think it's cool.
How many people here remember your birthday? Okay, I think it's unanimous. What did your brain have to do for you to respond to that question? Well, first of all, the sound waves had to leave my lips, travel through the air, enter your external auditory mediators, travel down to your tympanic membrane, set up a vibratory force, which travel across the ossicles of the middle ear to the over and round window, set up a vibratory force in the inner lip, which mechanically distorted the microcilia, converting mechanical energy to electrical energy, which traveled across the cochlear nerve to the cochlear nucleus at the pontomedullary junction, from there to the superior olivary nucleus, sitting bilaterally at the brainstem to the lemniscus, to the inferior colliculus, and the medial geniculate nuclei, across the thalamic radiations to the posterior temporal lobes, begin an auditory process. From there to the frontal lobes, coming down the tract of victory, retrieving the memory from the medial hippocampal structure, the memory bodies, back to the frontal lobes to start the motor response at the bed cell level, coming down the cortical spinal tract, across the internal capsule into the cerebral peduncle, descending down to the cervical medullary decusation, into the spinal cord gray matter, synapsing there, going out to the neuromuscular junction, stimulating the nerve and the muscle. So you can raise your hand.
Yeah, he lost me at cochlea, but I was following him that far.
Nice. Beautiful.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, you study it on that level, and it's just just amazing. Yeah, just amazing.
And we have so much knowledge now that now there was no excuse before we had the knowledge, because even if you don't have the knowledge of a cell or the inner processes, you can see from a seed growing and being able to reproduce itself. You can see the complexity in your own body, in animals' bodies, without even having knowledge of the inner workings. But now that we have so much knowledge of the inner workings, what excuse is there? An educated person has even less excuse than somebody who lived thousands of years ago and did not have the knowledge that we have.
Right. Yeah. I understand why some people do grasp onto evolution, and it's very simple. By the same token that we would look at the intercomplexity of an organism and see how that is so amazing, and beyond belief that it just happened. That it self-organized itself to such a degree of integration and complexity. On the other hand, other hand is literally the one thing that makes people believe that evolution may be true, and it's right here. The pentadactyl combination of the hand, which we find in cats and dogs, and even in other animals that don't any longer have 5 digits, but there's evidence that there were earlier ones that did. And so it seems like they're all organized in that way. And so just as we logically will say, if you have a creation, it requires a creator. If you have a design, it requires a designer. They would say, if you have organization like this, it must be related. And I understand that's the strength of their argument. Now, to make this, uniform through all of nature, and to make those changes that were drastic changes that would have been required to make it happen, in such things as a baleen whale coming from some kind of Pakicetus animal that walked on the earth, or a flying creature that is perfectly designed to inhabit the air, and that its breathing, its apparatus, and its circulatory system, and all of that. You put a human being in some kind of flapping device. If he's utterly athletic, he can stand it for a few minutes, but would tire so quickly, and they just fly for thousands of miles, maybe, or any of those kinds of things that are supposedly a change. It requires these tiny, minute changes that are absolutely programmed to take place and to develop things in exactly the right amount of time as that creature is developing as an embryo. And so it's yes, I get the similarity, but to say that all of those things are connected is a jump that is not in science at all. Gould said we only have the hubs of the different things. There's no connecting segments to tie it all together.
And Pastor, I'm sorry. I wanted to make a point about this after you finish. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I get this, but at the same time, all right, now give me a mechanism that actually works. What we do see in nature is the incredible ability of life to adapt to its environment in such a way that it doesn't go extinct. Now, that doesn't mean that individual organisms don't die. We watch on Galapagos Islands, for example, and with the changing temperature and climates and stuff like that, whole regions of certain kinds of creatures die out, but some survive, and then they come back. And then they develop certain kinds of diversity based on the interaction of their genetics to the environment. And so when I see that, rather than it being an evidence of this is how we connect everything into one common tree, this is how things survive in a changing world. That goes back to a greater design. Flexibility.
Yeah, Pastor Kevin, I would like to make a point about this because now you're proposing that this is a strong argument for them with the similarities in, for example, the digits. And we could agree with that but let's just say, like, if we say that similarity, right, if it all passed through this tree, like one tree, and branched off, as you say, that might be a strong point. However, there is a problem that has arisen as we have started studying these various features that are supposedly related in animals. Okay, we've found the problem that actually a lot of these structures, and I don't know about the digits, but I have a list somewhere of things that we've found that are look like similar structures, but we have found that they don't have the same origin in the genome. And so they had
or developmental pathways.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Now this actually shows that this argument from homology is not good, because if you have to evolve, and one of the things that I remember from the list is that they believe silk, the ability to make silk, evolved 20 separate times. Okay. Now, instead of just saying, okay, our theory is busted here, what do they do? Or that, hey, this is good evidence against our theory. No, instead they make up a word that will somehow make it all okay. So they've made up this convergent evolution. where supposedly these things evolve again and again, and these similar structures evolve. So they say that blood is so dissimilar in organisms that blood had to have evolved in seven separate lineages.
Wow.
And then you have to consider the separate lineages of, for example, hearts, so eyes, all of these things that are similar, wings, but they don't have a common, they don't have the ability to have a common lineage. So they had to evolve separately. And there's some that get really ridiculous numbers. And I don't have my list here right now, but convergent evolution is good evidence that this whole argument from homology is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying you're just saying that the physical similarities appear as if they come from a lineage, but when you go down to the genetic level, then there is no actual connection point between
Yes.
species to species, or even possibly
Yeah, the whole
interspecies.
basis for their thought
Yeah.
of ideas overturned by their own theory, but yet it just
Wow.
it's kind of like, yeah, it's
Well,
just a patchwork.
I like the hand argument only because I deal with AI all the time, and AI struggles with hands. It's always like deforming it, like you can't get a consistent picture, and then all of a sudden it's like everything else is perfect, but the hand is all jacked, and it's it's like AI can't even get it right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it struggles
So
with
it
it. It's
takes
weird.
more than artificial intelligence to create a hand, huh?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's insane because you get all this detail. You'll get freckles on the face, but for some reason why it struggles with that. It's so ridiculous. And then so you gotta go in there and then say regenerate this particular area.
Wow.
It's weird. Mm-hmm.
So is that because of the how unique the hand moves?
Right. The natural, so the way we move our hands, like the natural positions, right? I guess it's not intuitive to the AI to know if I'm sitting like this with my hand on the table, it will naturally rest in a certain way. So it doesn't understand the naturalness, or at least what we see as natural. So it makes a hand, but it's like this. It's like, well, nobody's holding their hand like this. That doesn't, or maybe the finger will be pointing up like this. It doesn't understand the function of the hand either. It's really bizarre.
So
It's just the hand, though.
It's the level of integration and complexity that is beyond its capacity
Yeah.
at this point.
Right, the flexibility of the hand itself, like the actual functionality of the hand, it doesn't process correctly. I guess maybe because there's so many different ways we could do this, it struggles with it. But yet, artificial intelligence deals with billions upon billions of
It'll get
points. So
there.
it'll get there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Well,
Go ahead. Sorry. Okay, and all that will prove when they do get there is that it takes a lot of intelligence and hard work in order to make something designed like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the problems that's solvable, but it's the problems that don't seem solvable. I don't know if you guys have looked at James Tour's, some of the stuff he's put out. Really interesting guy from Rice University. He's been making some he has his own YouTube channel now, but he works with, I think, what is it, nanotechnology. He's a chemical engineer.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Have you heard of that? Yeah, no, just that. I think has a lot of patents and really interesting guy. Anyway.
So did you invite somebody on here that had a contradictory view on this?
Yeah, I think they're in the chat. I think we got lots in the chat. They just don't want to pop up in here. Let's see.
Yeah, I have atheist friends, but B.S. Lewis is somebody I've known for a while, and I haven't seen some of the other guys. I don't know. He's Can you make the connection? That's his channel. Can you guys make the connection
Oh.
why 7 has to do with God?
Is B.S. Lewis his real name?
No.
That's funny.
It's funny. I asked Rebecca, you didn't answer my question in your live chat, Rebecca. I said, because she was doing a stream about, and maybe you guys want to give your comments on this too. I'd be curious what you'd say. But she was talking about pets going to heaven or not. And people always ask that question, right? And I'm trying to convince Rebecca about the state of the dead, and I've almost got her. So, but I asked her, I said, what about a minotaur? If I take him in from the street, will God resurrect my minotaur pet? Because I was joking, because that's how he demonstrates his avatar. But what would you say? 7 has, well, the whole point of the 7 is that it's not a natural increment of the astronomical cycle of any kind. So
yeah, the closest to it, of course, is that it's roughly equivalent with a portion of the lunar cycle, but not exactly.
What we do see time and time again. I'm sorry, I'm distracted. I'm actually trying to get a work demo. I have a demo for Intel tomorrow regarding something that I have to get done. One thing that you do see time and time again with other religions, not just Christianity, that 7 does represent like the perfect number, meaning like the closure. So it's perfectly closed. And so the fact that creation ends on 7, where other religions recognize that 7 is the perfectly closed number, that it's perfectly complete, then it would make sense that on the 7th day God rests because all of his creation was perfectly complete. So that's kind of where you see this association with the number 7 is God himself is saying that everything is perfectly complete, and then all the auxiliary religions around the world seem to gravitate to that same idea that 7 is this ideal statement of completion.
That may be thinking backwards about it. It may have it's we observe what other people do. This is something that may be different for other people that are not Seventh-day Sabbatarians. But I was trying to track this down in the old world, that in the 1st century, there was not a 2-day weekend. It was a 1-day weekend. And I tried to figure out exactly why that was. They didn't, even when Sunday observance became in the ascendancy, it was still a work day. They would meet together and then they would go to work. But in the Roman world, the 7th day was a dies nefastus, which meant an unlucky day. In other words, they had some sense of it that you shouldn't work on that day. And why did they think that way? I don't know. Maybe they had some bad experiences that happened on a Saturday. I don't know. But I think it probably had to do with the Jewish community, who gave it some deference. They didn't understand why they did, but they looked at them and said, well, they seem to be blessed. And if we do like that, anyway, it was kind of superstitious a little bit. But I think when we try to look back at 7, we can't really get back to the origin story from here without going into the Bible. And so for people will try to reason backwards, but the truth is 7 arises in the book of Genesis very early, and it's 7 and 3 is the most predominant number in the book of Genesis. So there's some kind of affinity even within it, without even describing why it's important, even in the book of Genesis. So the answer to BS's question is that 7 is clearly associated with the origin story and is repeated as this complete number, as you mentioned, throughout Scripture in a number of different ways, including the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. So 7 becomes the creator's number rather than any other number. 7.
Yeah, it's really it's ubiquitous. It's the Sabbath cycle, and then you get the Shemitah cycle or the sabbatical year cycles, which correlate with the Jubilee cycles, and then that's highly tied to prophecy, and you get the even with Cain and the curse with Cain, and then you get it with when Peter asked Jesus about how many times should I forgive, which is probably highly relevant. He says, and you see the Babylonian captivity in the 70 years, and then you see the 70 times 7.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of interesting patterns there. And then you get with Daniel. Let me ask you guys this before I close it down. But I'll have everybody a chance to have a last word before we close it down. But thank you for joining me. I really appreciate everybody who came in and participated and contributed. Any thoughts on why in Daniel the idea of time, times, and half a time? What the point? Why it's said that way, or anything about that? And or just any thoughts on that way of rendering it or what it's about?
Well, that would be a half of 7, right?
Yeah, I take it to being time times and half a time would be like a half, and you get that. Yeah, exactly. It's half of 7. I guess I should say I do see I do personally see kind of this pattern of the creation account. I take it literally, of course, but I also think there's something going on with a pattern of history going on there. So I kind of take that kind of old school view of there being something about Isaiah 42 sort of thing going on there. But it definitely seems, because that seems like Jesus comes in the middle of history, and there seems to be some of a 7,000-year pattern with the millennium and things like that, and the day of the Lord sort of language being the Sabbath. But any thoughts on that? Just throwing that out there. If not, just give any last thoughts you guys have. I'll give everybody a go.
I think I'd have to go into an exposition of prophecy to give a much of an answer on that.
Okay, yeah, I'm just, so maybe we can talk about that sometime, you guys, about prophecy.
Yeah, I just know that there are people who are very much against Seventh-day Adventist eschatology that don't dispute that interpretation either, with the times and a half. So I think that's interesting how they're okay with that. But not okay with the day for year principle, which is it's essentially the same justification. Like you randomly create a cycle out of numbers to represent whatever the cycle is you want to predict, right? But that's all I know. I know that for some reason why those who dissent against SDA eschatology don't have a problem with the SDA position on that as well.
Well, let's set up a time, you guys, if you guys want to talk about. I'm you wouldn't know it, but because it's lost in my thousands of videos that I've put out, but I've done a lot of research on Daniel in the sense of the different views on Daniel, and I'd love to talk to you guys about that if you're interested. But Rebecca, do you want to make any last points about our overall topic here, or any interesting points about your channel, or anything specific about evolution and creation?
Oh, thanks, Jamie. Well, I just want to say I would be interested in hearing you guys talk about the prophetic stuff in Daniel and hearing the different views, because, I've been like kind of, well, I haven't tried in a lot of years, but one time we did something with Jamie, but I guess I would say I'm somebody who I don't have a strong perspective about that. So I'm open to being influenced on that. But with regard to Matt's point about people accepting the eschatological, stuff with that, but not the 7-day, like the Sabbath keeping, I think you can accept the 7-day feature without saying that God intended us to rest on the Sabbath for all time. So, I mean, that's kind of how I think about it. But I don't know. I'd be open to hearing you guys' perspective on the prophetic stuff. Thank you for sharing, everybody. And I have to say, I love Pastor Kevin's background. That is awesome. It's beautiful. The colors.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This is my study.
Nice.
Awesome.
It's real. He's real.
You're up in North Carolina, right? That's where your church is.
Yeah.
Because I'm in Atlanta, so I'm in the Georgia Cumberland Conference, and I drive up to Morrisville for work. In fact, I'm driving up to Morrisville tomorrow because my company's headquarters is there. So I don't know. I guess
It's
I'm
not
saying
too far. It's not too
yeah,
far.
I'm in your neighborhood. Maybe I'll stop by on a Sabbath or so.
I'd love to have you. We are online, so you can kind of get a feel for us. Warrensville SDA Church.
Awesome. Thank
There
you.
is no other Warrensville SDA in the world.
No,
Nice.
that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
I'll put you on my channel
And
here.
do you and one last question, if you don't mind, are you still connected with like any of the professors at Southern University at all?
I've got some friends there. Yeah.
'Cause, my father-in-law is the professor of ethics and morality there.
Oh, cool.
So yeah.
Okay. What's his name?
Bauer. You know Bauer? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Great guy.
Yeah. I'm so lucky to have him as a father-in-law. Yeah. So
Oh, yeah. He's really deep. He's really deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've had some great discussions. He came for some meetings, and
Yeah.
I'm so sorry about the loss of your brother-in-law. That was
Yeah. No. I'm the replacement, actually. That's the connection there. So he adopted me as his son
Oh, wow.
because of that circumstance. Yeah. So Kayleen is my wife. And yeah, so she was a widow, and I met her and I took care of her while and then they had took me in, and he became my father-in-law. I go visit him, and we talk regularly, and he's met my son and everything. Like he's an incredible guy. I'm amazed you know about that story.
Yeah. Well, he opened his heart to us at the last meeting, and we talked afterwards a long time, and I was an idiot in my listening, and he was very thoughtful, and I learned something about grieving, very profound from him as we talked, and he hit me long before that. He gave a presentation in which he said, God, if you will be glorified in my depression, I guess I will accept that. And
Wow.
that was such a deep thought, that he could accept whatever it was, his depth of feeling, and God was there for him, and it was very powerful. It was at that moment that I realized I wanted to talk to him again. And so we would, whenever I dropped by the school, we'd talk a little bit, and then I've seen him a couple other times. So.
That's amazing. Well, he actually confronted me. Him and I were just having a theological conversation, and he confronted me. He's like, "Your theology aligns with Seventh-day Adventism. Why don't you just become one?" And I was like, "No, I'm non-denominational. I'm not going to be pinned down by a denominator." Literally, I tell him.
Right. That's
and he
kind of
goes,
your
"Yeah, but
definition.
yeah," and he's like, "But if your theology aligns, why don't you just do it?" And I go, I have to think about it. And he ended up baptizing me. So he was right.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's good
Cool.
to meet you.
I'm sorry to hijack that. Yeah, nice to meet you too. It really a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. That's kind of one of the blessings of this thing, is you get to meet great people through this. It's not just a topic. It's about people and meeting people and speaking heart to heart.
Amen. Well, guys, thanks for coming.
And thank you.
Next time, and come back again. I'm going to end the show. Love you guys. God bless you for coming, and hope to see you again soon. We'll talk soon. I'm going to play a little closing thing, and then thanks for coming to the audience, and I'll see you next time.
lived for over 40 years with a handicapped daughter. We have watched her struggle with life. I don't know how many times I've prayed that God would let me trade places with her. She had a problem called PKU, for which all babies are blood tested these days. They didn't know that much about it when she was born. So she had brain damage in early infancy. And we watched her struggle. We saw her discouragements. One time when she was a teenager, she came to me and told me about how discouraged she was and how that she wondered what the future would hold for her. I wanted to comfort her. I remembered a sermon that I'd heard one time, and I used a little sanctified imagination. I told her about how that everybody who ever lived or died is going to meet someday. Millions on the inside of a city looking out and millions on the outside looking in. And God is going to need someone on the inside who went through everything that they went through on the outside and still remained true to him. So I had her picture with me, someone from the days of the flood. And on the outside of the city, there is someone who says it wasn't fair. In the days in which I lived, the evil of men's hearts was bad continually. So it wasn't fair. I couldn't be a Christian in the days of the flood. God doesn't argue. He doesn't dialogue with them. He simply says, Noah, please stand up on the wall. Noah stands up on the wall, and there's nothing more to say. I pictured coming down to the days of Christ. And people found it hard in the days of the early persecution to live for Christ. There's someone on the outside of the city that says it was too hard for me to be a Christian. Why, I would have been stoned if I had been a Christian. And God says, Stephen, will you please stand up on the wall? And Stephen stands up, and there's nothing more to say. I pictured going down through the dark ages when millions of martyrs gave their lives for Christ. And there's someone on the outside of the city that shakes their fist at God and says, it wasn't fair. I would have been burned if I had been a Christian. And God says, Huss and Jerome, please stand up on the wall. And all voices are silenced. I talked about a woman on the outside who died of cancer, shaking her fist at God and saying, if this is the way you're going to treat me, forget it. And God has to have someone on the inside who went through the same experience stand up on the wall. And nothing more to say. Someone on the outside who experienced a broken home and the hardship that created. And someone on the inside who went through the same experience and stayed true to God. Then I told her about a teenage girl on the outside who was handicapped and who shakes her fist at God and says, it was too hard for me to be a Christian with my handicap and my discouragement. And right at that point, my daughter said, Dad, I got it. I got it. And she was weeping. She saw the privilege of standing up and being counted among the honor guard who remained true regardless of what happened.
This is how to get in